The leader of Bangladesh's interim government has announced plans aimed at restoring order and stability after the country's long-time Prime Minister was toppled during deadly protests and forced to flee last month. In an exclusive interview, Muhammad Yunus tells DW News his vision of the future for Bangladesh.
Millions of Bangladeshis are pinning their hopes on this man. They want him to overhaul a system that many believe turned autocratic and widely corrupt during former Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina's 15-year rule. Systems and institutions have to be fixed, he says, before a new Prime Minister is chosen.
Before the election, we have to get all the reforms, and reform on everything. In civil administration, reform in healthcare, reform in education, reform in judicial system, reform in the electoral laws, you name it. It's a whole long list of reforms that you have to go through. So we have to go through that whole process. We just announced 6 commissions right now, actually today. Commissions which will work on establishing the norms for administrations, norm for police administration, norm for justice system, and so on.
The toppled leader Sheikh Hasina is also accused of making amendments to the constitution that benefited her politically. Yunus is tasked to get that in order too.
So it's a complete constitution you have to write. This is one view. Another view is don't do the whole thing. Just amend the most important thing that we need right now, rather than rewrite the entire constitution. So this is the only differences. And our own view is we should not go through the rewriting of a new constitution. We should be focusing on the major issues of constitution and build a consensus. We cannot do anything without a consensus because our strength comes from the consensus.
As head of the interim government, one of the most important tasks for Yunus is to hold elections.
As soon as possible, that's our mandate. We want to come to the election and have a decent election, beautiful election, and celebrate the victory of a particular party or whatever party which comes in, hand over the power to the newly elected government. So this should be as brief as possible. We cannot give you date and time right now. There's only 1 month. We don't know exactly how much time each one of those reforms will be needed, because everybody agrees that we must complete the reform procedure first and hold the election.
Around 1,000 people were killed during the weeks leading up to Hasina's ouster on August 5th, making it the bloodiest period in Bangladesh's history since its 1971 independence. As the country's interim leader, Yunus faces a list of daunting tasks in a country that is still reeling from violence and uncertainty.
You can watch DW's exclusive interview with Muhammad Yunus in full on our YouTube channel at dwnews/videos. I'm joined now by Naomi Hussain. She's a Professor of Development Studies at the School of Oriental and African Studies at the University of London. It's been 1 month since the interim government, led by Yunus, took over. What's your assessment of this first month?
Wow, big question. I mean, what a daunting task. He listed the tasks that he has to deal with, or they have to deal with, the interim government, and they are making progress. I think it's really important to note that they have a lot of goodwill. People really respect and admire, and many of us really love Professor Yunus and think he's a good person with high integrity who will get things done. But there's a lot to do. So I think the first thing that they have been tasked with doing is restoring law and order, and that's been very challenging because the police are still not necessarily fully back in the stations. I think that the commissions that they announced yesterday, the 6 commissions, it seems like a very good strategy. But I think that analysts like myself, political analysts, probably think that you need more than new rules and new institutions. You also need to redistribute political power in a way that means that no political party can ever control matters like the Awami League did.
How should power be redistributed, in your opinion?
Well, I think that there's a lot of talk about ways in which citizens can be much more involved in governance more generally, in a much more routine and daily way. Independent institutions like the Anti-Corruption Commission, like Ombudsman, like energy commissions and so on can have independent citizen scrutiny and oversight. I think there's a lot of talk of this sort of thing. And there is provision for some of this in the law and in the constitution in Bangladesh, but it hasn't really been activated to date. So we're hoping for a lot more independent citizen oversight of what happens. Otherwise, I think we risk simply placing the faces at the top rather than really significantly redistributing power in Bangladesh.
And you mentioned the police aren't fully back in their stations. How safe is the country?
Well, sadly, it seems that in the industrial areas, Bangladesh really depends on its garments industry, its ready-made garments industry. It seems that there's been a lot of industrial unrest, and it's not quite clear who is responsible for this. It doesn't seem to be the usual worker groups, because they have agreed with the factory owners that there's a lot of politics being involved in these protests and this violence that's currently going on. Over 200 factories currently shut down in Ashulia in the Savar area. And it seems that the industrial police have not come back to their stations and taken charge of this situation. So that's one of the big concerns right now, is what will happen to the economy if they don't return.
And what will happen in the next weeks, months, if Yunus wants reforms, then an election? We're talking about, you said it yourself, a huge list, overhauling the economy, the electoral and judicial systems, healthcare, and even more. Is that pie in the sky?
I don't think it's entirely pie in the sky. I think we have a very strong track record in Bangladesh of dealing very well with crises, but also of innovating governance institutions. I think that with all the goodwill that the interim government has, some very, very capable people have been put in positions, advisory positions, and I think they have quite a lot of support from everyone, perhaps except for the former ruling party and its supporters. So I think that they probably will be able to. It depends quite a lot, I think, on what the international community does as well, whether they provide the finance. That's a critical question for the next few days.
Very interesting analysis there from Professor Naomi Hussain from University London. Thank you for being on DW News.
Thank you very much.